Okay, I think we're now ready to go. So thank you so much for joining this webinar. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Hopefully you can see me okay. If not, as I mentioned at the start, our chat is open, so you can always let me know. If you have any questions also during the webinar, also just throw them in the chat, and towards the end, we'll have a bit of time for Q&A. The goal of this webinar is to show you all how you can collaborate better in a team. Because yeah, you've got StoryChief, hopefully you've been using already, but how can we use make use of the collaboration features to work together better and more efficiently in our current processes? I see a quick question from Sonia. Can you see what I write? Yeah, I can see what you write, so keep the questions coming. So as you can see here, I've already shared my screen, and this is the dashboard of StoryChief. If you have not yet created your account, this may be quite new to you, but don't panic. After the webinar, I'll be sharing some links to some more help articles and videos to get you started. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a new story, because I think the first thing we should definitely look at is how we can invite people in and create editorial briefs. But before I do that, actually, I want to show you how we can create these users, because once you've created your StoryChief account, two things happen. You have your StoryChief account, of course, and then you have your user profile. Now, your user profile is what you use to log in, and to collaborate with other people, we need to create more of those user profiles. And we do that by heading on over to our users page. So where do we do that? Well, first off, we go to the top right-hand corner here, and then we click on users. So we do that, and now we are on our users page. And in my demo account, we can see all these users already created here. But let's create a new one together right now. So I click on the invite a user button, and we see this little pop-up menu appear where we can now create that user. So I want to create somebody called John Smith. There we go. Nice generic name. And I'm gonna add his email address in, and then I'm going to choose the role of his user. There are a few options here. We have publisher, writer, and guest writer. What are the differences here? Well, first off, let's start with guest writer. A guest writer can only write in stories that you have invited them to, or they can create new stories. They can't see every story in your account. They can't publish. A lot of the features are locked down to them. This could be useful if you are working with freelancers or perhaps other external people who don't need to see all of the content in your account. Second one is writers. Now, writers have more permissions than guest writers. They can not only create new stories and work in invited stories, but they can see every single story in your account. But they can't publish, whereas a publisher can. So they can publish, and also they can change settings in your account and those kind of things. So think of a publisher as a type of admin in your account. So for this John character, I'm going to choose publisher. And lastly, we can choose to notify the invited user. So what that means is they will receive an email from us, so they know they've been invited. So you can choose to enable that or disable that if you wish. And lastly, you can explain why you have invited them to StoryChief. So if they aren't quite aware of what StoryChief is, you could leave here a message, say, hey, I've invited you to my StoryChief account where we can collaborate together on stories, for example. And then finally, we can click on create. And now the user is created. And like I mentioned, they now receive an email from us to sign up and complete their account. Okay, so that's how we create a user. Very simple, very easy. Again, if you have any questions about anything, just throw it in the chat. If you're watching a recording of this webinar, you can send me an email to sam@storychief.io, and I can answer any questions. All right, so we have our user created. Now let's go back to a story. Let's create a new story, and let's look how we can use editorial briefs. So let's go back on to my dashboard here, and I'm going to click on new story. Okay, so now we're in our editor. I've got a brand new blank story, not a lot going on here. So let's first create that editorial brief. So I go up here to the top right hand corner, click editorial brief and click add brief. Now I can say for myself or for my other colleagues or users, what this story should be about. So what I want to do is I want to create an article about content marketing. So let's just type in content marketing for now. And then we can fill in some structured guidelines. So we provide this form already filled out with some rules. So what is the message, who is the audience, why this story, and how to convey the message. You can always remove this if you want to and just fill in something yourself. That's entirely up to you. And then we can add files, say Word documents, images, anything you want, and then a word count that you want the writer to hit, be it yourself or somebody else, and then an internal deadline. Now this internal deadline isn't used for publishing. Don't worry about that. It's more to give your users a deadline, a target to hit when you want it to be published by. And lastly, like I was saying, I want to now assign this to a colleague of mine, to that new user. So I click on assign to colleague, and now I can choose that new person. So if I scroll down here, see if I can find him, here we are, John Smith, I pick him. You can also choose multiple if we wish. So if we want multiple people to work in a story, we can add them to here. And then we click add one user. And there we go. What happens now is this John Smith character will now receive an email from StoryChief. So they know they've been invited to a story, and then they can click on the link and start working on it straight away. See a quick question from Christian. Can we invite as many users as possible? What about the costs? We do have different pricing plans, and they do come with different limits on users. I'll go a bit more in depth about that towards the end of the webinar, so stay tuned. Okay, so now we can close that. So now the person has been invited, they can start work on it. That person is now ready to go with that story. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here, and now we need to play a bit of fantasy right now. Just pretend that now this John Smith character has checked out the editorial brief and he started to write a story. Let's check in on him and see how he's doing. So here we are. Now he has created a story about content marketing. He's started writing some text. He's got some links in there. He's added a GIF as well. Great, fantastic. It's visually appealing. So we can see that he started work on here, but it's not quite finished yet. And this is how we can now collaborate even further in the editor. So we have somebody who is working on a story, and now we can check it out and we can leave comments and more for that person. So as I was just saying about comments, so what we can do now is, say we're reading the story and we see something that may need changing, maybe you have a bit of feedback about that. If we select text like so, we see our formatting bar appear. And from the formatting bar, we can put it in bold, we can put it in italics, that kind of stuff. But we can also, as I mentioned, leave comments. So we click on the chat icon, and now we can leave a message. I can say, for example, can you change this, please? And then I can tag somebody. So what I can do now is I can tag that John Smith character. Here we are. Click on save. And yeah, two things happen now. So number one, John Smith has received an email from StoryChief alerting him that he's been tagged in a comment. So he can then see the comment, he can check out the story and check out the feedback. The second thing is that you see in the top right hand corner, in the chat bubble icon, there's now number one, so that we know there's been a comment left in the story. So if we were to close this sidebar, if we were to load up the story, we would see, hey, there's a comment here. Let's click on that to see what it is. Okay. So very easy to leave comments. It's a great way to collaborate with other people. If you have multiple comments in the story, let's just quickly create one. We can also see easily where each comment is in there. So if I just say, change this, please, again, and click save. Now we have two comments. And if we click on each comment, we can easily see where they are located in the story. So very easy to stay up to date. Because we know from experience that when we are writing a story, there can be many comments, and it could be very confusing to find out where each one is located without being able to jump between them. And now imagine if John Smith has now checked out a comment, he's made a change. What he can now do is he can let us know. So he could say, okay, change this, thanks. For example, he can reply to the comment. And then he can decide also to resolve it. So if he thinks it's finished, it's resolved, he can click on that link and it's now removed from the open comments list. And it's then moved to resolved. So in that way, you can constantly improve your stories by leaving people feedback. They can then run with that feedback, make changes, resolve it. And then by the end, you have a story that's been worked together on with multiple people and ready to publish. Okay, next up, how do we also invite people in? So what we did earlier is we tag someone in a comment, but we can also invite more people to this story. Say if I have a colleague in marketing who also wants to write a bit in there, I can invite her in. So if I click the big invite button at the top, we can now choose another person. This works in the same way as the editorial brief when we invited the original John Smith person in. Now I can choose, for example, Jane Austen here. Again, we can add multiple if we want to. And then we click add user, and they are also added to this story. So now we see there's 2 users added in the top right-hand corner. That way you can also see at a glance who's working on this story. All right, so we've seen so far how to leave comments, how to do this editorial briefs, and also how to invite people. Next thing I want to show you is about how to request approval. So imagine again that John Smith has worked on the story a bit more, is in his eyes ready to publish, but he has to first ask myself or maybe a different manager or somebody else entirely just to give it the once over, just to read through the whole thing, just to give it a check. He can do that by clicking on request approval. So he clicks on there and now he has the option to choose people from this StoryChief account, from these check marks here. Or alternatively, you can also ask somebody external from StoryChief. So this is quite useful actually for maybe clients. If you're an agency, with clients, you can ask your clients for approval. But in our case, what I want to do now is I want to just choose a few people from my own account. And I'm also going to ask myself also for approval, just to save some time here. So let's add myself. And lastly, we can also leave a message. So if we wanted to say, maybe John Smith could say, I think this is ready now, can you check it? He could type that in here and then click on confirm. And now what we'll see is that this bar has now changed to the approval bar, where we can see who has been asked to leave approval. So in this case, at the bottom, we see, okay, there's myself, Jane Austen, and John Keats. They've all been asked to leave approval on this story. And because I've been asked for approval, I can also leave that feedback right now. So if I've read through the whole story, I think it's ready, I'm happy with it. I can now leave a message saying, this is great, it's ready to publish. There we go. And now I can click accept. If it wasn't ready yet, I could always leave a message and decline it so that this John Smith character could then make changes. But for now, I'm happy with it, I've approved it. Now we see that, okay, I've approved it here with my comments, so everyone knows what's happened here. But again, we're waiting for these other 2 people. When you leave approval for somebody in StoryChief, this is used as a guideline. Just imagine if Jane Austen and Jane Keats do not ever leave feedback, it does not block our publishing flow at all. Anybody who is a publisher can still publish it. Okay. So that's how we can request approval from other users. The last thing I want to show you inside the editor is the ability to check out the version history. So the version history is really cool if, again, you're working with multiple people making changes. It's a key feature to be able to check, who's done what in the story. So if we go top right corner here again, version history, and we can see every single version of this particular story. So it starts, it's reverse chronological order here. So we see at the bottom here, the original story with the default title. Then with each version, we can see what was added and when. So we can see here at 1:37 today, I removed the original title and I added all of this text. So in red is removed and green is added. That way you can see who has done what in the story. So we can keep going up and see what's been changed for each version. If you need to, you can also restore these versions. So at the bottom, restore this version, click on that, and the selected version will be used as the current version. Okay. So very easy to keep track there, especially again, if you're working with multiple people. Okay, so that's everything from the editor. So we've just seen how we can create this story and how we can work together in a team to make improvements, request approval, check out the version history, all ways that you can keep track and up to date on your content. Now I want to go back to our dashboard where I want to show you a few other key collaboration features in StoryChief. Again, if you have any questions, feel more than free to just throw them in the chat and I'll answer them in a little bit. All right, next up is the campaigns feature. Now, this is a really cool feature included in our professional plan. Let me just open that up. What it allows you to do is to group multiple stories together. Why is it so useful? Well, imagine if you are, again, working in a team and say, I'm creating an article about content marketing. My colleague, John Smith, is also creating an article about content marketing. What we should do is group these stories together into one of these campaigns. And then every single person in our account can see how far along those stories are in that campaign. Because they are related to each other, it's relevant and it's necessary to know how far along they are. So we can see here this feature of John's blog campaign that I created a little while ago. We can see how many people are working in this campaign. So how many people are working in those stories, and the overall status. So how many of those stories have been completed and have been published. And then if we click on that, we can also open it up and see all of those stories in detail. So once it loads here, there we go. So if I scroll down, we see there are 6 stories, 2 have been published and the rest are being worked on. So for each story, we can see who's the collaborator, who's the users on there. And then for the published stories, if you go to the top, we can see the total stats. So if you want to assign your users these stories in these campaigns, you can then track not only the progress, but the combined stats after it's all said and done. So really useful as a way to kind of keep track and gauge how performance has gone during the campaign. Okay, and the next feature I want to show you is the content calendar. This gives you a calendar-based view of everything going on in your StoryChief account. This, in my eye, is very crucial if you are working in a large team because you have many people creating lots of different pieces of content. It can be very hard to keep track. But with this content calendar, it gives you this nice grid-based layout where you can see, for each day, what will be published, what's scheduled, what's being worked on. And you can also filter by different things. So in our case, for collaboration, it's very useful to be able to filter by collaborator, so by user in the account. If I go down here to myself, for example, I can see stories that I'm working on. I'm not working on a lot, as you can see right now. We also filter by campaign as well, if they're in a campaign, by channel type, sorry, also by status. So if you just want to see what stories have been published, we can click on there and we can see here that this story was published on the 10th to these channels. So very easy, very clear. You can also create new stories from here as well. So say if I have an idea for a story that I want to publish in October, say on the 9th, I click on here and I can now create a story directly from the content calendar. So even if you aren't writing stories yourself, you can just load up the content calendar and create one right here. So I can say a test story and I can change the language, what time I want it to be published by. So say 2 o'clock. And then I can, from here, assign a user. So again, even if you aren't creating content right now, just create one story from here and then assign somebody, just like our John Smith character here. And then finally, we can also assign it to a campaign as well. So very easy, very simple, all ways that you can easily create content and assign it to different users. Okay, finally, you can also check out a week and day view of your content calendar. So if you are creating an awful lot of content, this is really useful to kind of yeah, check it out and know very clearly what's going on at what time. And one very final thing is you can also sync it to your own personal calendar application. So even if you aren't logged into StoryChief at that moment, you can see what is being worked on inside of your account. Okay, well, I think I've shown every single feature I wanted to show today about collaboration. We have a bit of time now for Q&A, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I see a quick question from Sonia about the choice of language. Is that in the content calendar that you're asking? Is it about creating a story from here? Does it automatically translate in another language? No. What happens if, let's go back to our dashboard quickly, I can show you a bit more in detail. What happens if you choose to translate a story? It creates a duplicate version of the story. So if I choose here, translate, for example, what it does, it makes a copy of that. And then you can set which language it is in the summary tab. So I can change to Dutch or French. As the original story was set to English, those are the two options that I have left. And once you've done that, then you need to translate it yourself. So we don't have a native translation feature in StoryChief yet. So you'd have to go in and change the text yourself. But all of the images and other content like this Instagram post here, that's still embedded. So all you have to do yourself is just change the text. Does that answer your question? Okay, great, fantastic. Any other questions for now? While you maybe think about questions, let me just discuss pricing because someone had a question earlier about that. So a lot of our collaboration features are built into our professional plan. So you can create a StoryChief account for free today if you want to, but upgrading to our professional plan unlocks a lot of those collaboration features, and it also enables you to publish more stories to a much wider range of channels. There's a question about how many users you can add. So let me scroll down here. So here we can see for the writers, guest writers, there are an unlimited amount. So you can create as many as you wish. But if you want people to be able to publish your story, there are limits on those. So on the free account and essential account, there is a limit of 1. But if you upgrade to professional, where you get all those other collaboration features, you are able to invite, have 3 people in total. Okay? Does that answer your question, Christian? If you have any other questions about pricing or anything like that, just let me know via sam@storychief.io and we can take a look at that together. If you are a very large team, perhaps an agency, I do definitely recommend getting in contact with us about a custom plan that works better for you. So again, just send us an email, send to myself at sam@storychief.io and we can take a look at that. Okay, well, I think I've run out of things to show you all today. If you are new to StoryChief and you want to have a more general look at everything that you can do inside of StoryChief, I would recommend signing up for our Introduction to StoryChief webinar. Let me share a link to that in the chat here for you all. So in that webinar, we'll be showing how you create a story, how you publish it, the whole general flow. So definitely sign up for that one if that sounds relevant to you. It's the same time as this webinar, but next Tuesday. And every other week, so next week is the introduction webinar. The week after that one, we'll have a different themed webinar. So definitely stay tuned on that front. Check back on the webinar page every now and again to stay updated. Thanks a lot for the nice words, Jürgen. Always nice to hear. I think that's everything for now then. Thank you all so much for joining. It's been a pleasure showing you all how you can collaborate inside of StoryChief. And I hope to see you all again very soon in a different webinar. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. Bye for now.